Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome again to another podcast episode on Talk Architecture. And I'm your host, Naziaty Muhammad Yaqub. I have been doing a series of uh, podcasts on stop spoon feeding architecture students, why graduates lack confidence. In fact, I've done part one and part two and also a 3,000 words essay at my blog, Life is a Design Thesis. So I was browsing through my feed when I chanced upon someone I follow, and I think about this discussion again, and I need to go and discuss this from a much more specific and focused point of view with regard to spoon feeding. So here we are discussing on why students of architecture and graduates get spoon fed in school. So what this video or shorts was telling me about is the notion of a comfort zone, because that triggered or that is related to what we've discussed earlier regarding making a decision and the problem for the graduate to make a decision, which not only is common among younger people when they have, shall we say, got stuck. And it could be many reasons. So Chase Hughes suggested that what's a comfort zone? It is this perimeter thing that you build in your brain around things that you can't or haven't processed. It's a way of lacking in maturity, one would say, a way of not being able to learn from experience yet, because you haven't experienced, you haven't been able to process what's in your brain. So we'll look at this quotation, and what he says, obviously, is that there's about some emotional stuff that haven't been processed before. He says it in general. Is to do with a lot of things, but I'd like to use what I learned from this and what I reflected upon with regard to with this episode number 3. Yeah? So, you have some emotional stuff you hide away, like maybe you will not go on stage for fear of being laughed at, or similar actions based on your decision making that you are afraid of doing because you might fail or get laughed at or be judged somehow. So Chase suggested what we call a comfort zone is how we are in this mode of thinking of the future and being protective of ourselves and not wanting to decide or not being able to decide in this manner. I'm thinking about this, and when it comes to students of architecture and graduates not wanting to make a decision, and how it becomes the tutor being not patient enough or not able to get the student to break that barrier in themselves so that they can make their own decisions, end up spoon feeding the student. So what this suggests is that students haven't been able to process yet, and they are protecting themselves when they do not want to make a decision. So what do we do as tutors? Because we're talking about the architecture education curriculum, design studio learning, and all that. So the person who leads those programs, obviously, are the designer of the program, which is the tutor or the studio tutor. So the main role of the tutor is to get the student to break the self-imposed barriers in their mind. Could be anything, but it got a feeling that some things worked in the past. I'm also writing a book um, on Kevin Matlow, the interviews I had with him in my podcast episode since 2021. And this is the very first one, the first interview where it was quoted. Kevin said, everything's related. Everything will always have something to do with something else. But we don't realize that. Education is still very much divided and focused on viewpoints rather than the relationships between them. And we also discussed in episode number 2, where we talk about the problem of spoon feeding, and where we see that why can't they think for themselves? We explored the dangers of spoon feeding in design studios and the lack or declining curiosity and weakened problem-solving skills, drawing from Dr. Abhijit Chatterjee's insights. So this is what we need to do. And then when I reread again and reflected on what Kevin Matlow said, then I realized about relationship, and the biggest relationship in architecture education is the relationship between the tutor and the student. Obviously, in anything in education, would want to know, depending on the discipline, and this discipline is architecture education, relating to architecture design and the studio. Excuse me. So another thing about relationships is we talked about liberal arts education, which is more diversifying, and you learn a totally different major along with your major, which is architecture. It could be performing arts, or it could be history of art, or it could be totally different from creativity. It could be finance or accounting. What I'm trying to say is that there is a relationship between finance and accounting and architecture, like what we discussed also, learning about business in architecture. And this is not so much something that is a stranger, because architecture practice, most of it in traditional practice, is about having to do with commerce, having to do with being a commercial endeavor. So, really, that would be a very good thing in liberal arts, where you actually learn about accounting with architecture. And I have met people who diversify in such a manner, always thinking out of the box, always being one step ahead of others, the entrepreneurial spirit as well, the sense of solving problems in terms yet deep and yet encompassing, or looking at those relationships. So the great thing that I learned from Kevin Matlow, who is for 6 years almost, was someone who I collaborated as part of the studio team for students of architecture, both the 5th year and the 2nd year. Kevin Matlow has, to me, been someone who is very much understanding about spoon feeding or not to spoon feed students. And I learned that from the very beginning, because I made a lot of mistakes in my life spoon feeding students. And that's because we get too emotionally caught up in trying to please the student. Now, this is something that, you won't be wanting to agree with, but because of the time, duration of time may not, you feel that it's not enough or sufficient for the student to deliver, you give a lot of hints, including spoon feeding. Sometimes a tutor would actually sketch out the detail or sketch out a solution for the student, and the student love it. There's one particular part-time tutor that I had. Wow, student really love when he gives input on how to resolve. And I was fascinated as well, but I wasn't aware that that is not the right way to do things until I became a tutor with Kevin in my studio. And that was when I realized now I'm going forth and reflecting back on many other mentors or tutors from the past. And one that I believe that I was very fortunate to have studied architecture, diploma of architecture at the University Technology of Malaysia in the early 80s, where there is a very dedicated set of lecturers, young lecturers, and they were thinking out of the box as well in terms of the studio programs. And I felt that I had one of the best experience in learning from UTM when it was in Kuala Lumpur at that time. And later when I joined that School of Architecture in the early 1990s for about 3 years, I realized that the programs were excellent. The way the students were allowed to get themselves out of the self-imposed comfort zone, shall we say, and try to be more confident. And when they were not confident in their design, or they were not confident in their schoolwork or the projects, they were confident in being involved in the workshops. And maybe there is also the theater group and other performing arts that was associated with the School of Architecture. And we take for granted that this is good for the student to be able to have more social interaction, to be able to work with others and build their confidence in being maybe a leader or being part of a team, maybe being a good follower, being, what it means to be in a team and work together. So the meaning and the purpose of life probably could emerge earlier, where the student of architecture can see the future in a way that is not so scary after all. So in where I worked in, say, in the last decade, and some of it with Kevin and others, I would like to say that other lecturers were very good as well in terms of understanding that they need to break the barriers in the student's mind so that the student can actually not rely or be dependent upon the tutor. Out of like 30 students, there'll be one or two that will be scared shit. I mean, sorry about that, but they are just something that is the traumatic thing or the emotional burden of it all is too great, and they just want to pass. Our schools nowadays, the universities, they would like students to pass rather than be stuck in the school for a long time. They have graduate on time deadlines or duration where it's better that student graduate on time. So when we design the architecture design curriculum, we can design it in such a way that those diverse learning happens. And if you can't go to overseas to get the student to go and visit schools of architecture or visit case studies overseas, you can always do it within our country, within a small budget. And it could be also budget in. I mean, I know the School of Architecture budget in trips and those sort of case studies and workshops to be done outside of the school compound. But how do we do it? How do we make that these workshops and visits actually will break those self-imposed barriers in their minds? You know, um, yes, many of my reflections are to do with episodes or times when I try to solve the problems for the students. I recall so many times, and in Malay language, it's called syok sendiri lah, meaning that you just, you like it. You are the one who's enjoying it, solving the problems for the student. And you're thinking it's a big deal, like you're doing them a favor, but you're not. So, I mean, many, many times, I have remembered that I was trying to solve for the students. I also thought third year and fourth year, and many times in the second year. It takes a lot of patience for the tutor to wait for the student to do something, but you could have more time to engage with them and tell them you're not looking in the right direction when they could not come up with the right questions to ask themselves when they are posed with a design problem. And you have to be on top of your game as well, where you are aware that when you face a student, you have to be 100% concentrating and focus on them and not thinking about your work or something else, and listening to them carefully and what have they shown to you, the sketches they've shown to you. You can pick up something in there that is promising. I've had also good memories of being cool enough, calm enough, and listening, having the capacity to give space for the student to actually uh, know that they need to resolve it themselves. And it helps when the students know how to sketch. But we don't have to be seduced by lovely sketches and say, oh, how wonderful their sketches are. No, even the most scratchy of sketches, or, how cartoon-like the sketches are, and how those words, they need to express something. Maybe in words, maybe they find something interesting in reading something. We need to take the time to actually listen and actually get them to actually reflect on that. Yes, students could be afraid of being judged, afraid of making mistakes. And when they get into the habit of making mistakes all the time, it's a great small wins there, not but many great small wins there, where they would eventually find their footing and understood about asking questions. Yeah, many of us tutors, I mean, maybe I would talk about myself, and maybe you can find yourself in me in what I'm about to say. Many tutors feel good. They want to feel good about themselves as well. The day is not good. It's a bad day. You quarrel with someone or you get angered by something, and then you want to find something good, to feel something good. So you give a lecture and you didn't ask questions, you didn't ask whether the students understood what you were giving, and most people zoned off anyway, and then you feel good, but really the message didn't get across. So what it is that similar in the studio environment, you give your studio input, then you sat down, and then the students still make the same mistakes. They didn't really listen to you, but you got angry because you didn't listen to my lecture. I just said about this thing just now, about half an hour ago, but it looks like you don't understand. So the capacity to be calm and give a space for the student to reflect, and it is for the student at the end of the day. I cannot imagine right now there are universities that are thinking to do away with key performance indicators, 0% for teaching. I mean, this is something that is, shall I say, is a travesty of injustice or justice. When you say travesty, you say of justice. This is injustice. This is wrong. This is something that should never be allowed. 0% teaching KPIs. Even 30% is very low. So the idea is profess, and the rest is up to the student to be confident on their own. But I'm stating out there, the main role of the tutor is to get the student to break the self-imposed barriers in their mind. What are educators but someone who dwell and thrive on understanding the processes of learning and knowing how to teach properly and giving themselves that knowledge and the skills to teach properly. And also when conducting or having those classes in studios, also doing the right thing. But then there you go, 0% KPI. Therefore, you don't have time to teach. You just profess and hope that everything goes right. So that is something that is happening. I mean, 30% is still very low. But when you talk about 30% out of 5 days a week, 5 days a week, 7 hours, 35 hours, 30%, meaning 10 hours. So 10 hours, 1.5 day. And you're given, you need to do what? Group teaching. There are times when you need to go and have a desk crit, one-to-one. Where will the desk crit go? And then for those who feel that they need to see the students for desk crit, they will do something beyond the 30%, goes to 60%. And they get burnout or overworked. So this is the thing about university education, where the university ranking is placed to be the most important thing that each staff member has to target for and fulfill the KPIs so that they can also be considered to be gain a position beyond what they are having at that moment. So architecture students are different than other students in the sense you have desk crit, one-to-one tutorial, sometimes taking 20 to 30 minutes per student. Nobody fights for that when they are administrators in the universities or the heads of department. They do say it to the university board or um, Malaysian qualification agency or framework committees when they try to get accreditation, but it just fizzle out. It doesn't really work in action. And when you get middlemen, um, shall we say, bureaucrats imposing the 0% teaching KPI, what does that tell you? That tells you that they are thinking that students are going to do magic. Let the bright student only excel, and the others lag on. Do you know what I mean? And at the same time, they want to graduate on time. I'm sure you and your university, you as an academic, have faced this dilemma. And therefore, that's the conclusion that I'd like to make, is that relating what's been said in the last two episodes with spoon feeding, the topics were on spoon feeding, and really when students need to decide, they're wanting to decide, they need to be able to be breaking the barrier and not being afraid to make mistakes. And the student and the lecturer could help, or the tutor could help in collaboration with the rest of the other staff at the university, at the School of Architecture, to do workshops and to have programs that will help the student break their self-imposed barriers in their mind. So with that, I conclude the spoon feeding series with the episode number 3 today, and how we as tutors need to be aware of this. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. Take care.